They say fate is like a coin toss, you never know which side you'll land on until it's too late. For me, that coin was flipped the moment Ethan Carter stepped into my family's living room 3 days before our wedding and asked to marry my sister instead. Not out of love, no, not even out of desire. He said it was destiny. Apparently, some high-paid master fortune teller named Warren told his family that unless he married a woman with a coy fate, he wouldn't make it past the age of 23. And lucky for Heimer, unlucky for Mimi's sister, Vanessa tested positive for that golden destiny stamp. I was the one he was engaged to. I was the one who embroidered my wedding dress for 6 months, with swollen fingers and stupid dreams. But when he found out about Vanessa's supposed coy aura, he came knocking with a marriage exchange like we were trading baseball cards. I tried to stop it. I told him she wasn't pure, that her fate was already flawed. I didn't want to say it, but I had to protect her in the only way I could, by dragging her dirty secret into the light. Vanessa ran. She slipped. She fell down the stairs. I saw her body at the bottom, crumpled, lifeless, and Ethan's only response was to glance down and sigh, like this was God's way of telling him I was the wrong choice from the start. On our wedding day, Ethan had an accident. A serious one. When he woke up, he didn't remember me, so he claimed. He looked at me with those icy Carter eyes the day I gave birth and had someone rip my child from my arms like I was a breeding machine, not a human being. I hemorrhaged on the table. I begged for mercy. And all he said was, "So the coy fate is broken, and your body's defective. That was your excuse for marrying me." His voice was sharp, cold, final. I faked my amnesia, Claire. I've known this whole time. For 3 years, I've wanted nothing more than to kill you. Now you can go to hell and apologize to Vanessa. I died that day. But death wasn't the end. I woke up again, right back to that familiar moment, Ethan standing in our living room, talking about swapping brides like I didn't matter. And this time I didn't fight. If he wanted someone flawed, then so be it. Let her have him. Let them both burn. Vanessa dropped to her knees and clutched my hand like some tragic heroine. Claire, Ethan is my true love. Please, please help us. The smell of her cheap perfume hit me like déjà vu. I stared at her fake tears and remembered the operating room, the icy bed, the blood. I extended a hand to help her up, still stunned at how my past was repeating itself when Ethan shoved me aside. Claire Bennett, what the hell are you doing? He barked. I'm warning you, the only woman I've ever loved is Vanessa. I stumbled backward, crashing into a chair. He ran to shield her like I was a villain. My parents rushed in too, panic all over their faces as they hovered around Vanessa like she was made of glass. My back throbbed, but I forced myself to stand. Fine, I said, brushing dust off my dress. Let's exchange the engagement. I won't marry Ethan Carter. For a second, even Ethan was stunned. What tricks are you pulling now? I almost laughed. The man who orchestrated my humiliation now thought I had an agenda just because I said yes too fast. It's not a trick, I said. Love only matters when it's mutual. If you don't want me, I won't beg. But I do have one question. Aren't you afraid of dying? Right then, the front door slammed open and Mr. Carter stormed in with fury written across his face. Without warning, he slapped Ethan across the cheek. The wedding's in 3 days. What nonsense are you spouting? Do you know how you've survived this long? It's because of her fate. Ethan rubbed his cheek with that smug pout of his. Dad, Vanessa has coy fate too. It doesn't matter who I marry. Plus, I'm healthy now. That master's prophecy might be nonsense. Then he turned to me like he was doing me a favor. Claire and I are only engaged. I'll compensate her. No need to make this dramatic. Mrs. Carter rushed over to smooth things out, practically bowing. Claire, don't misunderstand. Ethan's just confused. Vanessa really does have coy fate. I nodded slowly and took out the marriage certificate from my purse. Before my coy fate was broken, I still had luck. But Vanessa, well, she's no longer pure. That means she lost all hers. Ethan's face contorted in fury. He snatched the certificate and lit it on fire. Don't talk nonsense. Vanessa and I are a perfect match. The paper turned to ash as I watched the symbolic end of everything we once were. Vanessa beamed like she'd just won the lottery. My parents helped the Carters pack up the engagement gifts. 8 luxury SUVs, full of dowries, rolled up to our driveway. To mask the awkwardness, Mrs. Carter added even more diamonds, real estate, stock shares. "It's all for your sister," my mom said, like I was just a tool to negotiate a better deal. I knelt down to inspect one of the boxes and was kicked square in the chest by my own mother. "Claire Bennett," she hissed, "how dare you bring up that thing about your body in front of the Carters? Do you know what kind of damage that could do to Vanessa's image?" Vanessa was holding the Gu family's ancestral bracelet like she'd been born into wealth. Her eyes were full of contempt when she looked at me. I snapped. I was warning them. "If Ethan doesn't survive, they'll come after you next." My father tapped my back with his cane. "That's none of your concern. Your mother and I have a plan. At the wedding, after Ethan gets drunk, you'll sneak into his room and sleep with him in behalf of Vanessa." I froze. "What?" "You heard me," he said. "You're not favored, but you're still useful. Am I even your daughter?" I whispered. Mom slapped me so hard my ears rang. "You should be honored to sacrifice for your sister." She said she doesn't even mind if Ethan touches you first. My vision blurred. In my last life, Vanessa's fall was an accident, but they blamed me anyway. They whipped me 10 times, locked me in the ancestral hall for 3 days without food or water. Now here they were, plotting again. When I said nothing more, Mom seemed satisfied. She tossed one of the plainest wedding gifts at me. "You can keep this. The rest is for Vanessa's dowry." That night, I sat in my tiny dark room staring at a phone number I hadn't dialed in years. Outside the door, the rest of my family was celebrating like they'd just won the lottery. My phone buzzed with a 2-word message: "Come downstairs." I slipped out. The wind outside felt like freedom. At Westwood Estate, the man leaned against a leather couch, slowly removing his tie. "So," Daniel Carter said, his eyes sparkling, "you said I owed you. How should I repay you?" I looked him up and down, then pulled off his coat. "Sleep with me." His jaw twitched slightly. I smiled. Since they planned to use me as a sacrifice, I'll just get ahead of them. I wasn't going to let them dictate the ending of my story again. This time, I'd write it myself. When I got home the next morning, the first thing I saw was Ethan Carter's Maybach parked in front of our house like it was a trophy. Inside the living room, the space was filled to the brim with boxes, more gifts, more riches, more bribes. Vanessa ran over to grab my hand like we were best friends. "Claire, look. Ethan sent all this just for me. Can you believe it? This land deed bought the entire Eastwood property." I told him not to spend too much, but he wouldn't listen. Her eyes sparkled like she had already forgotten the look she gave me last night, the one full of smugness and victory. Ethan sat on our old family sofa like he owned the place, like we were the guests now, not him. He reached out to ruffle Vanessa's hair, looking at her like she was a diamond in the sun. Then his gaze shifted to me, and just like that, the warmth in his face vanished. "Of course I have to give Vanessa the best," he said pointedly, his voice cold. "Unlike someone else, she's worth it." I didn't flinch. I'd already learned how to be immune to his words. But then Vanessa tilted her head and asked innocently, "By the way, Claire, I saw you getting into a man's car around midnight last night, and you only came home this morning. Nothing happened, did it?" Her fake concern made my stomach turn. I hadn't even opened my mouth when Ethan suddenly shot up, grabbed my shoulder, and hissed, "Claire, who the hell were you with?" I yanked my arm away. "Why do you care? What I do has nothing to do with you. Or her." He scoffed and threw a dress bag at me. "I don't care either. I just don't want you infecting Vanessa with whatever trash you've picked up. This is the wedding dress you made adjusted to her size. Wedding's in 2 days." The dress fell at my feet. I stared at it for a moment, months of late nights, hand-sewn pearls, silk layers I dreamed of wearing myself. Every stitch had been sewn with trembling fingers and too much hope. I made that dress for the version of Ethan who used to bring me midnight snacks and kiss my bandaged fingers. That version, I now knew, never truly existed. My parents rushed in like summoned beasts when they heard Ethan's voice. "Of course, she'll fix it," my mom chirped, dragging me by the arm. "Claire made that dress a year ago. It'll fit Vanessa perfectly once she adjusts it. You just focus on the wedding, sweetheart." They locked me in my room to work. Every hour, someone came by to check like I was a prisoner on labor duty. I wasn't allowed to eat until I finished another section. And I kept stitching not because I wanted to, but because they would have dragged me by the hair and done it anyway. The wedding of the century was being held at the Grand Manhattan Ballroom, and I was the seamstress-turned-martyr. By the time they dragged me to the venue, my eyes were dark-circled and my hands raw. My parents stood beside me, trying to pretend they were proud while whispering instructions under their breath about when I'd sneak into Ethan's room after he passed out. I wasn't even their daughter anymore. I was a pawn in some disgusting scheme. Ethan entered like a king, flanked by his parents and flocks of guests. My parents shoved me forward to greet him. I tripped and fell directly toward him, but instead of catching me, he stepped aside like I was trash. I hit the floor hard, my knees screaming, and the gasps around the room cut deeper than any slap. "Claire Bennett," Ethan snapped, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Could you be any more shameless? Remember, after today, I'm your brother-in-law." The crowd murmured, their judgment like daggers. I heard there was drama about swapping brides. Looks like the rumors were true. Poor Vanessa. Having a sister like that, I gritted my teeth and stood, preparing to walk away with the last shred of dignity I had left when a blood-curdling scream erupted from backstage. Vanessa stumbled out, clutching her back, her dress torn, her eyes wide with fear. Blood smeared her arm. Ethan rushed to her like a knight in a movie. "Vanessa, what happened?" She clung to him and turned her trembling face toward the crowd. Claire did something to the dress. I trusted her. That's why I let her fix it. But what are you talking about? I shouted. I didn't touch your damn dress. But it was too late. Ethan ran backstage, and when he returned, he threw the mangled dress at my face. The fabric slapped against my skin, and something sharp scraped my cheek. Blood trickled down. Dozens of needles were embedded in the lining, glue smeared the hem, and the straps had been torn deliberately. Vanessa lifted her skirt, revealing red glue burns on her legs. "It hurts so much to tear it off," she whimpered. "Claire used to bully me at home, and now she's doing this just because Ethan loves me. Why can't you just let us be happy?" The crowd gasped again. Ethan turned to the bodyguards and barked, "Strip off her coat. Make her wear the dress she ruined so much. And pour the glue. She likes glue, doesn't she?" I saw a guard reaching for the bucket. I took a breath and shouted, "Wait. I have proof." The music stopped. The crowd paused. "I recorded the whole alteration process," I said, pulling out my phone. "And I installed a camera backstage, just in case." The footage rolled on the projection screen. Vanessa, scowling, was shown stabbing needles into the dress and gluing the lining. A makeup artist applied fake red marks to her legs. Gasps filled the ballroom. "She framed her sister," someone shouted. "This second Miss Bennett is disgusting." Poor Claire, she was being set up. Vanessa looked panicked. Ethan's parents' faces turned from smug to stunned. But Ethan doubled down. "An act," he roared. "This is fake. You've always hated her. You'll do anything to destroy her happiness." My parents jumped to her defense too. "Claire's always been jealous," my mother said. "She pushed Vanessa into a ditch at 5, broke her arm at 10, tried to steal her toys and crush her dreams." I laughed coldly. "Really? Then, how do you explain this?" I tapped my phone again. New footage played and being slapped, shoved, humiliated. Vanessa pushing me downstairs. Vanessa cutting my hair in my sleep. Vanessa stealing my belongings while my parents looked on and smiled. Ethan stormed the stage and yanked the projector cord, plunging the room into darkness. He kicked me hard in the stomach. I coughed blood as a needle embedded deeper into my back. "You think you can trick me with fake videos? You think this makes you innocent?" he spat. "You'll never be my wife. Even if you crawled into my bed, I wouldn't touch you." Goo's mother clutched my wrist, hissing, "You're trying to force a marriage. You're no better than a palace drama villainess." I looked at Ethan's face, twisted with hate, and thought of the life I lost, the child, the years, the pain. And I thought, if I had known you'd turn into this monster, I'd have killed you myself. My parents stood at the edge of the stage, mouths open as their plan collapsed. The crowd buzzed louder, and I stepped off the stage, limping. That was when I saw Daniel again. He was standing by the exit, cigarette butts scattered at his feet, eyes full of shadows. "Why are you here?" I asked, surprised. He looked me over and scowled at the bruises. "What the hell happened to you? Weren't you supposed to get married today?" I pulled him toward the car. "You're so behind on the gossip," I whispered. "Didn't you hear? The bride got replaced. And me? Well, I've got a few bruises, but they're nothing compared to the scars I already carry. And Daniel?" I paused and looked him in the eye. "I think I need to stay with you for a while." He looked stunned for a second, then handed me his ID. "Then, be responsible. I'm your husband now." The marriage certificate was still warm when I held it that night. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just stared at it and felt like for one side taken control. We toasted in the candlelight. "To new beginnings," Daniel said softly. But before our lips could meet, my phone lit up. Ethan Carter's voice trembled through the speaker. Claire, where are you? Come back, save me." For a moment, I just stared at the phone like it was some kind of cruel joke. Ethan Carter's voice breaking through the speaker with that pitiful desperation. I never thought I'd hear from him. The same man who once ordered someone to drag my newborn from my bleeding body, who framed me in front of hundreds on our would-be wedding day, and now, here he was, whispering through the line, begging me to come back and save him. But before I could even process it, Daniel grabbed the phone, his jaw tight with annoyance, and with one quick flick, he ended the call and tossed it aside like it was a piece of trash interrupting his moment. "You're not even present when I kiss you," he muttered, his voice low and dangerous. "Looks like I'll have to punish you properly." And I wanted to laugh at how casually he could flip from romantic to jealous in seconds. But before I could respond, Ethan's voice came again. More frantic this time. "Claire, whose voice is that? Where are you?" And then came the crashing sound of something heavy falling, followed by the panicked screams of Mrs. Carter yelling for a doctor, yelling that something was wrong with Ethan, that he was collapsing, and honestly, a part of me wanted to ignore it, to pretend I never heard anything, but the past has a funny way of clawing its way into the present, especially when you haven't fully buried it. And that night, even though I was in Daniel's arms in our legally binding marriage with his ring still warm on my finger, my mind kept drifting back to that call, to that weak voice, and I hated that it still made my heart twitch with something I didn't want to name. And in the morning, the knock on the door was sharp, desperate, and familiar, and when I opened it, there stood Mrs. Carter, mascara smeared, her usually perfect hair now in a disheveled mess, and behind her was Vanessa, head down like a scolded child, and on the stretcher between them was Ethan, pale, unconscious, tubes already hooked into his veins, and I didn't even blink because I just didn't expect them to find us this fast. "Claire." Mrs. Carter gasped, clasping her hands as if she were praying. "Please, Ethan needs you. He needs your coy fate to survive." And the hypocrisy nearly knocked me back, because not long ago, I was the liar, the outcast, the woman not worthy of even being called family, and now I was their last hope, their backup plan, their emergency serum. And before I could speak, Daniel stepped beside me, his hand wrapping around mine, calm but firm. And when Mrs. Carter saw his face, the recognition hit her like a slap. "You're Daniel Carter?" she whispered, eyes widening, and Ethan somehow woke up right then, as if summoned by the tension, his eyes landing on our joined hands, and he jolted upright like a madman. "Claire, why are you with my uncle?" And his voice cracked with a kind of betrayal I found ironic, because let's not forget, he left me bleeding to death, humiliated me in front of hundreds, but now he suddenly wanted answers, and for a moment I just stared at him, wondering if he'd always been this delusional or if karma had finally started working its magic. "You're married to my uncle?" he asked again, eyes bloodshot, and Mrs. Carter nearly fainted at the word married, mumbling something about the disgrace, about the scandal, and that's when the truth spilled out like a storm, because no one, not even the Carters, had known that Daniel wasn't just some forgotten son of the family patriarch, was the favorite, the true heir, the one everyone had tried to suppress because his existence threatened everything Ethan had. And when they finally realized it was too late, Daniel was already holding all the cards, including me. And when the doctor rushed back in with more test results, the room grew still. "There's an unknown toxin in Ethan's body," she said. "We can't treat it without a compatible donor or source of purification." And all eyes landed on me, the original coy-fated woman, the one who'd already been discarded once, and Ethan's voice trembled as he reached for my hand. "Claire, I'll marry you again, just save me." But before he could touch me, Daniel slapped his hand away, his expression unreadable but cold. "Watch your mouth. Nephew's your aunt now." And honestly, I almost choked because the irony was too good, but things escalated when Vanessa suddenly burst out. "Why her? I'm the wife. I have the coy fate, and Mrs." Carter turned on her like a wild animal, slapping her so hard her earrings flew off. "You lied to us. If it weren't for your so-called coy luck, Ethan wouldn't be dying." And Vanessa sobbed, trying to insist she was still pure, that the curse was fake, that something must have gone wrong. But then Daniel scoffed, his eyes like ice. "Watched too many palace dramas, haven't you?" And that's when Ethan's dad, Mr. Carter himself, entered with the infamous Master Warren, the man who started this mess years ago, and he walked around the room slowly, examining Vanessa, then me, then Ethan's nearly lifeless body, and finally said with a sigh, "I told you the match I chose was crucial, but you changed the bride." And then his eyes locked on Vanessa. Her coy fate was real once, but it's tainted now, no longer useful. And when he looked at me, he paused. "Your luck as Shiftingit's no longer fully yours." And all eyes turned to Daniel, who stood there with that smug glint in his eye like he already knew, and before anyone could process that, Vanessa cried out, "Wait, I'm pregnant," and silence fell like a hammer, but Master Warren suddenly nodded thoughtfully. "There may be hope still. The blood of a child from the Coy line could help purify the toxin." And that's when the room exploded into chaos, Ethan's eyes lighting up with hope, Mrs. Carter demanding to use the baby immediately, Vanessa panicking and clutching her stomach, crying that the baby was a life too, that they couldn't just use her like that. But Mr. Carter snapped that it was just umbilical cord blood, and that's when I pulled out my phone and made a call, not saying a word, just letting the pieces fall into place, because this time, I wasn't going to be the victim anymore. And 5 minutes later, the doors burst open again, this time with a young man, blonde hair, gold chain, reeking of cheap cologne, storming in with a folder full of papers and a vengeance in his eyes. "Vanessa, don't you dare pretend you don't know me," he shouted, holding up a positive pregnancy test and screenshots of their chats. "You said if you married Rich, you'd take care of me. You said this baby would have the Carter name and we'd live the good life." And Vanessa froze, paled, and shook her head violently. "No, he's lying. I don't know him, but he wasn't done. You used me. I thought you loved me, but you're just a gold digger. This is my kid." And then he slapped her so hard she dropped to the floor, and everything that happened after that was just confirmation. The DNA test, the hospital records, the prenatal appointments with multiple men, and Ethan, now weak and humiliated, asked Mrs. Carter to handle it, and she did, throwing Vanessa out of the hospital without mercy. And when my parents tried to defend her, they were shut down by the cold truth that their perfect daughter was a walking scandal, and for once, they had no words to spin, no lies to cover up with, and Ethan lay in bed with tears streaming down his face, begging me to stay, to help, to save him. And Daniel simply looked at me and said, "Do you still want to save him?" And I looked at the man in the wheelchair, who destroyed me once, who might have cost my child's life, and I said with all the calm I could muster, "No, let him live with what he's done, or die by the fate he chose." And Daniel, my husband, kissed my forehead and whispered, "Good answer, Mrs. Carter, good answer." I thought that would be the end of it, me walking away. Ethan Carter left in his hospital bed surrounded by the mess he created. Vanessa exposed, humiliated, tossed out like the disposable pawn she always was, and my parents silenced for the first time in their lives. But nothing ever ends that easily when it comes to the Carters, especially not with Ethan's life hanging by a thread and my so-called coy fate still bleeding through their obsession with survival, because just as Daniel and I were about to finally leave the hospital, his hand wrapped around mine, and his voice ready to say something soft, something grounding, Mrs. Carter suddenly appeared in front of us with tears in her eyes and desperation written all over her perfectly powdered face. She dropped to her knees on the cold linoleum floor, right there in front of everyone, and begged, "Claire, please, he's my only son. The doctor said the toxins are still in his body, and without you he won't make it." And honestly, for a split second, my chest tightened, not for Ethan, but for that twisted version of myself who once believed I had to keep saving people, who only saw me as a tool, a stepping stone, a sacrifice. And then my gaze flicked to Vanessa, sitting in the corner, head bowed, silent, and I knew she wasn't crying for Athano. She was crying for herself, for the status she lost, the plan she failed to pull off, the future she thought she had just by stealing mine. And then Mr. Carter stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable with his wife's display, but still trying to keep control. "If you won't help him, at least let someone else use your blood," he muttered. "We can compensate you, anything you want." And before I could even speak, Daniel's voice sliced through the air like ice. "She's not for sale." And then he pulled me close, his arm around my waist like a barrier between me and everything toxic in that room. "My wife doesn't owe you anything, not a drop, not a glance, not a damn second of her time." And for the first time in my life, someone protected me like I was worth protecting, and I think that's when the weight of everything finally settled in. The lies, the betrayal, the years I spent begging for love in all the wrong places. And that's when I decided to end it properly, to rip off the last mask they were still clinging to. So I smiled sweetly and said, "You're right, Mr. Carter. Someone should take responsibility for Ethan's condition, so how about we ask your son what he did all those years ago that led him here?" And the room fell quiet, the air thick and heavy, because the one thing no one expected was that I knew the truth behind Ethan's curse, behind the poison in his blood, behind the reason Daniel always kept a certain distance from the Carter family despite being born with the same surname and arguably even more power. So I turned to Daniel, looked him in the eye, and asked gently, "Is it time?" And he nodded once, his expression unreadable, and then he said it out loud for everyone to hear. "When I was a kid, Ethan tried to kill me." And you could have heard a pin drop as the shock spread through the room like wildfire. Even Mr. Carter staggered slightly, muttering, "What are you talking about?" And Daniel kept going, calm and cold. "He pushed me off a cliff because he thought I was going to inherit the company, because his mother always whispered in his ear that I was the threat. But I didn't die. I landed in a nest of snakes, and the venom should have killed me. But something ancient must have been watching, because it didn't. Instead, it marked him." And suddenly the timeline clicked for everyone. The curse, the masters, warnings, the snakes, the trauma, and Ethan, now weak and trembling, looked like he wanted to disappear into the hospital bed. "I didn't mean to. I thought you weren't supposed to survive," he whispered, and Daniel's voice didn't shake once. "And yet I did, and you didn't just leave it there, did you? You burned the whole snake nest. You skinned the creatures that saved your life. You mocked what you didn't understand, and now you want salvation from the same line you tried to erase." And Mrs. Carter collapsed into a chair, whispering no over and over, while Vanessa tried to sneak out the back unnoticed. And that's when Master Warren stepped forward again and said, "There's one last way: atonement through submission. The one who harmed the spirits must live among them, must face what he destroyed." And the solution was as cruel as it was poetic. Ethan had to return to the snake cave, had to survive 3 full days in complete darkness, surrounded by the same creatures he once slaughtered, and only then would the toxins begin to fade. Only then could he hope for mercy, and to everyone's surprise, Ethan agreed, because fear of death will humble even the most arrogant man. So they flew him out that very night, wrapped in blankets, drugged to keep him calm. And Vanessa, well, she didn't go with him. She was locked away in the Carter basement, heavily guarded, not for her safety, but for Ethan's, because no one trusted her anymore, and that should have been the ending. But it wasn't, because a few days later, my parents showed up at my door again, their faces pale, their eyes bloodshot, and my mother clutched my arm like she hadn't disowned me, like she hadn't beaten me and thrown me out into the snow 10 years ago. "Claire," she sobbed, "they took Vanessa. They won't let her back. They said she can't return until the baby is born. Please help your sister. Go talk to the Carters. Ask them to bring her home." And I stared at her, stunned, not because of her words, but because of how little she understood. "She's your daughter," I said. "Why don't you go fight for her?" And my father stepped forward then, his hand trembling before it slapped me across the face, the impact sharp and fast. "You ungrateful brat," he hissed. "We raised you, fed you, and this is how you repay us." And I laughed, really laughed for the first time in years, because the truth was finally too loud to ignore. "You raised me to be her shadow, her insurance policy, her sacrifice," I said, my voice steady despite the sting on my cheek. "You didn't raise me, oh, used me." And then he raised his hand again, ready to strike, but Daniel caught it midair, his grip steel, his eyes like fire. touch my wife again, and I'll make sure Vanessa's next tears are from a jail cell. And with that, he pulled me away, slammed the door, and shut out their begging cries like they were never part of my world to begin with. And I thought that would be the last time I'd hear about Ethan Carter. Until the call came the next morning. He survived the cave, barely, weak, unrecognizable, but alive. The toxins reduced, but the price had been paid. His legs were paralyzed, his voice thin, his future uncertain, and Vanessa, who had tried to escape one night, was caught and thrown back into the dark, the family having finally accepted that she was nothing but a liability. And when Mrs. Carter called again, her voice shaking with gratitude and defeat, asking if Ethan could see me one last time, I hesitated, and then I went not for him, but for me, to close the door once and for all. And when I saw him, sitting in that wheelchair, pale and ruined, his eyes met mine with something that almost looked like regret. "Claire," he whispered, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, please give me another chance." And I smiled, gently, firmly, and said, "You think what you've suffered is enough to erase what you did? That it balances out the child I lost, the pain I carried? No, Ethan, your pain is justice, not redemption." And he broke, sobbing into his hands, calling my name like it would change anything. But as I walked away, Daniel waiting for me by the door with a smile and my favorite coffee in his hand, I knew this was it, that the past was finally buried, and the only thing I had to do now was live. I thought walking away from Ethan Carter that day would finally be the end of our story, that I had said all the right things, drawn the final line, and that whatever remained of him, his regrets, his guilt, his broken body, would wither somewhere far from my life. But fate, as always, had a flair for dragging people back in just when you thought you'd escaped, because 2 days after I turned my back on that hospital room, I got the message. He was asking for me again, begging, this time not with words but with gestures, sending letters through Daniel's assistants, pitiful flowers that were returned before they even touched our doorstep, and handwritten notes talking about memories we never actually shared, things he must have made up in that guilt-addled mind of his to make himself believe he'd loved me once. But I didn't reply, not once, not out of spite, but because I knew better now. I knew that every ounce of attention I gave him only fed the fantasy that he still had a chance, and I was done being his excuse for redemption. But of course, my silence only made him more desperate, and eventually Mrs. Carter called again, not with demands this time, but with shaking breath and a tone so raw I almost didn't recognize her. "Claire, please, Ethan is getting worse again, and he says if he could just see you one more time, maybe he'll have the will to keep fighting." And I almost laughed, because wasn't it her who screamed at me that I was a disgrace, who called me a temptress and accused me of trying to ruin her daughter's wedding, and now here she was, acting like I was a lifeline, a last thread of hope. But instead of laughing, I stayed quiet, and she took my silence as a maybe and added, "He says he knows he deserves to suffer, but he can't let go of you." And I wanted to say, then maybe he should have held on the first time, but instead, I said nothing, because Daniel came home that night holding something that left me breathless, a folder full of papers, legal documents, asset transfers, and right on top of it all, a title deed with my name written in bold. And when I looked at him, confused, he just smiled. That slow, confident smile that always made me feel like the ground under my feet was solid for once. "It's yours," he said. "All of Itching family's old properties. The land your parents tried to trade for Vanessa's dowry. The business rights they nearly sold to the Carters, I bought them back, and they're in your name now." And I blinked, stunned, overwhelmed, because I hadn't even asked, hadn't even hinted at wanting revenge on my parents. But he had done it anyway, quietly, decisively, like it was the most natural thing in the world to protect the woman he loved. "And this," he added, handing me another envelope, "is from the GU Group effective tomorrow. I'm officially the majority shareholder." And for a second, all I could do was stare, because I knew what that meant, that everything Ethan had been promised as a child, everything he thought would be handed to him without question, now belonged to the uncle he tried to kill and the woman he discarded. And when I opened the last document and saw my name listed under legal spouse and heir, I realized something else. This wasn't just revenge anymore, it was reclamation. It was me finally taking back everything I was once denied, not because I had to prove anything to Ethan or Vanessa, or even my parents, but because Daniel made me believe I was worth giving it all to. And the next day, when the Carter family gathered in the boardroom expecting a transition meeting, Ethan rolled in with his wheelchair, eyes hollow but defiant, and saw me sitting at the head of the table next to Daniel, poised, calm, unbothered, and for a second, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not love, not rage, but something in between, maybe recognition, maybe realization that he was never truly the main character of this story. And just when he opened his mouth to speak, the board members announced the shift. The applause was polite, and Ethan's shoulders slumped slightly like he could barely breathe. And then, just when it seemed like things would end quietly, it happened. Vanessa, who had been released from Carter custody after her failed escape attempt, showed up in the parking lot in a stolen car, her hair wild, her face pale, and before anyone could react, she slammed her foot on the gas and aimed the vehicle straight at Ethan, screaming something unintelligible as she crashed into his wheelchair, sending him flying across the concrete like a rag doll, and the sound of metal and bone hitting the pavement was something I'll never forget. Chaos erupted as security tackled her, screaming, and Ethan lay there, unconscious, blood pooling beneath him while the Carters screamed and cried. And later, when the ambulance confirmed he didn't survive the impact, there was a strange, eerie silence that followed a silence that felt like closure, like the final page of a book that had gone on too long. And Vanessa was arrested on the spot, screaming that she didn't mean to do it, that she was angry, that she was tired of being ignored. But no one cared anymore, especially not the Carters, who disowned her on the same day, and within a week, she was sentenced. And my parents, now truly broken, showed up at our doorstep again, this time begging not for Vanessa, but to place blame, accusing us of ruining everything, saying that if we hadn't taken everything from them, none of this would have happened. And my mother, once so prideful, collapsed in our doorway with half her face paralyzed from the stroke she suffered after hearing the news of Vanessa's sentencing. And for the first time, I looked at them not with hatred, not even with pity, but with complete indifference, because the truth is, some people are born to love only conditionally, and no matter how much I gave, I was never going to be enough for them unless I bled for Vanessa, and now that I wouldn't, I was dead to them. And I was okay with that, because the same day I cut ties for good, Daniel and I received a delivery an envelope from a private lab, addressed to me, with the results of a paternity test I never asked for but always wondered about, and inside it said with 99.99% certainty that I was indeed the biological daughter of Robert and Ellen Bennett. And I stared at it for a long time, numb, until Daniel gently pulled the paper from my fingers, folded it, and said, "It doesn't matter, some parents just don't know how to love." And I realized he was right, that biology means nothing when the heart doesn't follow. And just as I let out a shaky breath, he knelt on one knee with a velvet box and a new ring, one I hadn't expected because we were already married, already together. But he looked up at me with a gaze that held no shadows, no ghosts, and said, "Claire, from now on, I'll love you with everything they never gave you, with everything you deserved from the beginning." And when he slid that ring on my finger and kissed my hand, I knew this time I wasn't just surviving, I was finally living. They say closure is a myth, that some wounds never really heal. They just scar over and become part of who you are, and maybe that's true. Maybe some things will always sting a little when I think about them late at night, like the baby I lost without even getting to hold him, like the years I wasted begging for crumbs from a family that never saw me as anything more than a spare part. But I also believe that healing doesn't always come in a dramatic moment. Sometimes it's in the quiet, in the little things like waking up without dread, or seeing your name on a property deed you actually earned, or cooking dinner with a man who wraps his arms around your waist just to kiss your shoulder while the pot's still boiling. And that's what life slowly became with Daniel. Not perfect, not storybook, but real, full of softness and sharpness and honesty and safety. And when I tell you that he changed the entire trajectory of my life, I don't just mean the business empire he handed me or the protection he offered. I mean the way he looked at me, like I wasn't a burden, like I wasn't too much or not enough or a backup plan, but a woman who deserved the world and didn't have to bleed for it. And even though the world around us kept spinning and people still whispered my name like it belonged in a tabloid scandal, I didn't flinch anymore. Not when the headlines said Carter empire falls into hands of disgraced ex-fiancé, or Bennett heiress becomes billionaire overnight, because for once, none of it made me question my worth. And that in itself was the kind of peace I never thought I'd get. But of course, peace doesn't mean the past disappears entirely, because a few weeks after Vanessa's sentencing, I got a Laterno return address, Just my name in shaky handwriting on the envelope, and inside was a note from a woman I once called sister, scribbled in blue ink on lined paper from the prison infirmary. Claire, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I'm sorry not for everything. Maybe I'm not that noble yet, but for lying to you, for making you feel small just to feel big. I wanted your life so badly that I forgot how to live mine. And I stared at the paper for a long time, waiting to feel something, anger or pity or some flicker of closure. But all I felt was empty, like her words couldn't reach me anymore because I'd already built a whole new life where her voice no longer echoed. And I didn't respond, I didn't need to, because some apologies aren't for forgiving, they're just confessions of guilt, and I had nothing left to give her, not even hate, and not long after that, my parents vanished from the city, packed up whatever reputation they had left, and moved somewhere I didn't care to ask about, and that absence, strangely enough, was the most loving thing they ever gave me space to breathe, to grow, to become someone who didn't flinch every time a door slammed or a voice rose, and slowly, things started to bloom again, like the day I saw my name listed on the Forbes Women to Watch list, or the first time I was invited to speak at a university where I told a room full of girls, "You're never too broken to start over." And I meant it because I was living proof of it, and Daniel, my husband, my safe harbor, kept every promise he ever made, even the quiet ones, like being there when I woke up crying in the middle of the night from dreams of blood and operating tables, or holding my hand every time I walked into a room full of people who used to laugh behind my back. And one morning, as I stepped into her home office and found him reorganizing my planner by color and priority, his newest form of love language, apparently, I laughed and said, "You know you're stuck with me forever, right?" And he just looked up and said, "That was the plan since the beach, Claire." And I thought about that moment, about how it all started with salt water in my shoes and betrayal in my chest, how I met him when I was at my lowest, how I pushed him away because I didn't think anyone could really want someone so used, so discarded, and how he chose me anyway, over and over again, not because I needed saving, but because I deserved to be loved for real this time, and that love kept growing, not in grand gestures, but in the everyday things, the way he saved the last bite of dessert for me, the way he stayed up late helping me prep for board meetings, the way he always believed in me before I even believed in myself. And on the anniversary of our wedding, the second one, the real one, the one we planned together with no secrets, no blood bargains, no cold hands forcing a signature, I stood under a canopy of white roses in a garden lit by fairy lights and told him with tears in my eyes, "Thank you for not letting me drown in my own story." And he whispered back, "You rewrote it yourself. I just held the pen when your hands shook." And when we kissed, the world didn't disappear like in the movies, but it finally made sense. And months later, when I saw those 2 pink lines on the test, I didn't panic, I didn't cry, I smiled, because this time, I wasn't scared, I wasn't alone. And when I told Daniel, he didn't ask if I was sure, he just picked me up and spun me around, laughing like a boy, and for a moment, all I could think was this is the life I was meant for, not the pain, not the betrayal, not the trauma, but these a soft morning light, a warm kitchen, a future that felt earned. And when the baby came, a little boy with Daniel's quiet eyes and my stubborn mouth, I held him close and whispered, "You are worth it, all of it." And I knew, deep in my bones, that my story didn't end in blood or betrayal. It ended here, in love, in peace, in reclaiming everything that was once stolen. And if the past ever dared to knock again, I'd let it stay outside, because inside this life, I was finally whole.